Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the Persian desert, where the sun still beats down as if it has something personal against you. You're standing in the middle of a land that is bone dry, shimmering with heat waves, and cruelly proud of its own furnace like days. Yet against all odds, there's something cold, something sweet, and something refreshingly absurd waiting for you here. A frozen dessert. Yes, you're in the middle of a landscape where lizards complain about the heat, and somehow the Persians manage to keep ice all year long. You probably wouldn't survive a week without water here, let alone expect to enjoy a snow-chilled saffron sorbet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, drop a comment with your location and what time it is as you're listening. I love knowing if you're drifting off at noon in California or nodding away at 3 a.m. in Berlin. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk into the Persian plain, the sky painted in copper and red at sunset. The earth feels cracked beneath your sandals, still holding the heat from the day, yet in the distance looms a mysterious dome. Imagine a beehive, swollen and smooth, made of mud bricks the color of toasted bread. You're curious, what could possibly be inside? In a land where dates and melons dry too quickly, this dome hides the opposite of heat. A chill so deep it could cradle ice for months. This is where the story begins, with a culture that refused to let the desert dictate its appetite. The Persians, centuries before refrigerators and ice makers, were already perfecting the art of refrigeration. And they weren't doing it halfway. They built monumental structures known as yakchals, literally ice pits, that functioned as natural freezers. While other civilizations were still struggling to store grain without it turning rancid, the Persians were leaning back, spooning saffron ice cream that would put your neighborhood gelato shop to shame. The mainstream historical fact here: the earliest yakchals are believed to date back to at least 400 BCE, during the Achaemenid Empire. These were not small backyard experiments. They were vast, conical buildings, some as tall as a 5-story apartment block, that could store tons of ice harvested during winter or made at night under desert stars. Now, here's the quirky tidbit. The Persian trick wasn't just about keeping things cold. They mastered making ice in the desert itself. Using shallow pools of water, placed strategically where nighttime temperatures plummeted, they could freeze sheets of ice even after blazing days. Then, with a little ingenuity, they would chip it up, transport it, and tuck it into the insulated belly of the yakshal. But of course, historians still argue whether these engineering marvels originated fully in Persia, or whether similar techniques trickled in from neighboring Mesopotamian or Central Asian traditions. Did the Persians invent the refrigerator of antiquity, or did they just push it to architectural perfection? No one seems quite ready to agree, which is honestly part of the fun. You stand closer to the dome. The mud brick is cool to the touch, surprisingly cool because it's not just any mud. It's mixed with sand, clay, goat hair, and in some accounts even egg whites. Yes, egg whites. Imagine an empire so dedicated to frozen dessert that chickens were involuntary construction workers. The wall is thick, tapering as it rises, and the air that sneaks out of a tiny opening smells faintly of damp earth, almost like stepping into a cave. A sleepy joke to tuck in here. You start to think the Persians might have been the original overachievers at dinner parties. Oh, you brought bread? Cute. I brought ice cream in the desert. It's the ultimate flex. You wander inside, ducking through a narrow doorway. Immediately, the temperature drops. It's not just cooler. It feels hushed, like the building itself is breathing out a secret. Imagine standing in the dark belly of a dome where the walls seem to bend sound. If you whisper, your own voice curls back around you. And stored within this hush, beneath layers of straw and frost, is ice-frozen water gleaming faintly in the lamplight, stubbornly resisting the fury of the desert sun outside. Your imagination starts to play tricks. Maybe you're in 500 BCE, and a worker, sweating in linen, wipes his brow as he stacks block after block. Maybe a royal steward hovers anxiously, making sure the supplies last until the king's midsummer feast. And maybe, just maybe, one teenage apprentice is sneaking a tiny sliver of ice for himself, risking punishment for the sake of the coolest sip of water in Persia. The structure around you hums with patience. You feel the weight of centuries pressing into the dome, a design so clever it outlived the empires that built it. You stand in silence, a desert traveler peeking into the improbable, frozen water where no water should exist, and you're only at the doorway of the Persian freezer. The real story, the ice, the canals, the saffron deserts, and the empire's frosty arrogance in the face of desert heat is still waiting to unfold. You step deeper into the dome, your feet brushing against the dusty stone floor worn smooth by centuries of quiet footsteps. The air feels still, but not dead. It's heavy, like a secret being kept on purpose. Above you, the yak hall rises like the inside of a seashell, its spiraling dome funneling heat upward and out through a small opening at the top. That, as it turns out, is no accident. The design is doing silent battle with the desert. These aren't just mud huts with ambitions. Yakchals were architectural masterclasses in passive cooling. Tall, conical, and thick-walled, they stood in strategic isolation. No shade trees, no walls nearby. Just a standalone structure that looked like it could summon a snowstorm if you asked politely. The mainstream historical fact? Yakshals were typically constructed with walls up to 2 meters thick at the base, made from a special mixture called sarouj, a blend of clay, lime, ash, sand, egg whites, and goat hair. This material was waterproof, insect-resistant, and perhaps most importantly, an excellent insulator. The cone shape wasn't just stylish, it minimized sunlight exposure and allowed warm air to rise and escape through the vent at the top. You lean back and stare up at the point where the dome meets the sky. It's not fancy. There are no mosaics or precious stones, but the elegance lies in the geometry. The engineers didn't build these for beauty, but they ended up beautiful anyway. There's something quietly spiritual about a structure that defies the climate using nothing but shape and patience. Now for the quirky bit. Yakshals often included underground storage pits, massive ones dug several meters below ground level. This meant the ice wasn't just hiding under a roof, but buried beneath layers of earth and air that moved like a natural coolant. Some of these pits were so deep you'd need a rope and pulley just to retrieve a slice of ice. You might be imagining servants hauling up frozen desserts in gilded bowls, and you wouldn't be far off. But more often, it was practical, keeping meats, rosewater drinks, and medicinal herbs cool for months. Still, you can't shake the image of a child reaching down into the earth and pulling up a lump of pure desert-born ice like a miracle in their hand. Of course, historians still debate whether the Yakchal design evolved purely from Persian innovation or whether earlier Mesopotamian or Egyptian cooling structures inspired it. There's even speculation that travelers along trade routes brought snippets of similar ideas from snow pits in Central Asia to Greek snow jars, and the Persians refined them into perfection. Either way, what they created lasted long after their blueprints vanished. You trace your fingers along the wall, surprised again at how cool it remains. No fans, no wires, just material, math, and centuries of trial and error. And maybe a little goat hair. You imagine being one of the builders. You're up before dawn, mixing sarouj under a copper sky, kneading it like dough with hands that already know what heat will try to do. You press layer after layer of it against a domed frame, watching it dry like skin. It's not glamorous. No one applauds you. But maybe, just maybe, you're thinking about your granddaughter taking a sip of cold water during next year's scorcher. And that's enough. Here's a sleepy little detail. The angle of the dome wasn't random. Engineers often positioned yakshals to take advantage of prevailing winds. In desert regions like Yazd, a consistent northerly breeze could be channeled through specially designed vents, called badgers or wind catchers, to circulate cooler air down into the pit. It's like nature's own air conditioner, but powered by silence and mud. You sit down on a smooth rock near the pit, letting your legs dangle just over the edge. The coolness drifts up in lazy waves. Somewhere above you, the stars are coming out, but inside the dome, it's always twilight. You can hear a faint drip of water, almost like a lullaby, echoing from below. Now the tone shifts slightly, softer, like you're settling in for the long haul. You close your eyes and imagine being a traveler in ancient Persia. You've walked for days, your lips are cracked, your skin tastes like salt. And then you're led here into the dome, the chill surprising your bones, and someone hands you a small, chipped clay cup. Inside, a spoon sinks into something pale and melting, laced with rosewater. You taste it. It's so cold it burns. But it's also a kind of joy, the kind that doesn't shout. It just sits beside you and breathes. And the thing is, this wasn't just a novelty. This was science, culture, foresight, and a bit of stubbornness that said, no, the desert doesn't get the final word. You lean back, letting the whispering walls carry your breath away. The yakshal doesn't creak, it doesn't groan, it simply stays cool. Always. Quietly doing what it was born to do. Make ice in the desert and wait for you to arrive. Your bare feet move along a low stone ridge now, tracing a path beside what looks like a long, shallow trench. In the moonlight, it almost seems like a decorative feature, but it's not. This groove in the desert soil is where the miracle truly begins. This is the ice harvesting field, or at least one of many. Long before freezers and chest coolers, ancient Persians figured out how to trap the cold night air into something usable. The idea was so simple it bordered on genius. Pour water into wide, shallow channels during winter nights just a few inches deep and let nature do its thing. You kneel down, imagining the crisp stillness of a Persian winter, so different from the daytime inferno. The desert, paradoxically, becomes a cold partner after sunset. With no cloud cover to trap warmth, the temperature plunges. If you're lucky and if the wind stays calm, a thin sheet of ice forms on the surface of the water by dawn. That's the historical fact here. Persians didn't just store ice, they made it, on purpose, using only the chill of desert nights. And they did it with engineering flair. These channels were typically built with a north-south orientation, allowing the sun to strike only the narrowest edge during the day, minimizing melt. Each morning, workers would break the new layer of ice, gather it in woven baskets, and carry it to the yakshal for safekeeping. But the quirky bit? Some of these workers believed that speaking loudly near the ice would jinx the freeze. Whispering during ice collection became tradition, not just out of reverence, but out of practical fear that noise might disturb the cold. Whether superstition or early acoustic science, the silence was part of the process. So here you are in your sandals, tiptoeing across a patch of land that once hosted a silent ballet. Men and boys, some no older than 12, crouched at the edge of the ice fields with woven paddles and wooden scrapers. They worked quickly, cheeks red from the dry cold, fingers numb but disciplined. And all this just to gather ice in a land where rain was a rumor. You picture a team of oxen trudging by as the sun begins to rise. A cart creaks under the weight of straw-insulated baskets filled with fragile, precious chunks. A child walks beside it, holding a half-melted piece in her hand like a diamond. And the sun? Already angry again, already rising, already plotting its daily siege. Historians still argue whether this method originated independently in Persia or was borrowed from highland nomads who used similar shallow pans in colder regions. Some even suggest influences from ancient Chinese ice harvesting techniques brought westward by travelers or merchants along the Silk Road. The truth? Like most ancient brilliance, it probably evolved in parallel multiple civilizations. Same problem, similar wild ideas. As you stroll the frozen trench in your mind, imagine the rhythmic scraping of paddles against ice. A calm, scraping chorus in the pale morning light. There's something oddly soothing about it. No shouting, no rush. Just the quiet urgency of preserving cold before it disappears. You take a deep breath. The desert smells different at dawn, like dust that's paused. The wind holds its breath. And the men? They move like clockwork, muscle memory guiding them. Each chunk of ice is gathered not with drama, but with duty. It's not about luxury. Not really. It's about readiness. Now allow yourself a moment of gentle humor. Somewhere along the line, someone probably dropped a piece of ice on their toe, shouted something entirely unprintable, and broke the sacred morning silence. Maybe that's where the superstition began. Don't speak while collecting ice, or your toes will remember it for a week. Still, the work wasn't glamorous. Imagine rising in the bitter cold, long before sunrise, wrapping your face in a cloth, dragging your aching body out to the trench, and hoping the temperature dipped low enough overnight. There were failures. There were windstorms. And there were days when the ice just didn't come. But when it did, it felt like magic. You pass your hand gently across the empty channel, tracing the faint echo of frost long gone. It's strange, so much labor, so much care, for something so fleeting. But maybe that was the point. Cold was sacred precisely because it didn't belong here. It had to be invited, gently, each night, and treated like a guest. And so the Persians didn't wait for winter to do them a favor. They worked with it, coaxed it, respected it. You imagine them kneeling beside the trench, watching the stars above while water quietly transformed beside them. The cosmos above, the ice below, and a feeling, however brief, that they had outsmarted nature. You smile to yourself, feeling the ground beneath you cool just slightly in your imagination. There's no frost here now, of course, but the spirit of the work remains, the echo of careful, quiet harvest. And soon, those baskets of ice will begin their journey. Not just into the Yakshal, but into palaces, gardens, markets, and stories passed from generation to generation, still whispering, yes, we made ice in the desert. You leave the open trenches behind and step toward the great dome once more, but this time you circle to its rear, where the ground dips downward into a dry, shaded alcove. It's quiet here, almost deliberately so, like the building is waiting to show you its true secret. Not the ice, not the treats, but the design. You walk along the base of the Yakshal and press your hand to the wall, thicker than any modern house. And behind it, layers. Not just material, but mathematics. This is where the genius of ancient Persia flexes quietly. Because while ice gathering required patience and ritual, keeping that ice from melting took real ingenuity. Here's the mainstream historical fact. The structure's shape and materials weren't chosen for aesthetics, they were a thermal strategy. The dome minimized surface area exposed to sunlight. The sloped sides allowed warm air to rise and exit through a vent at the peak. But the real weapon? The materials. You step closer to the wall, peering at the mud brick. It's not just clay. It's sarouj, remember? That ancient Persian cocktail of sand, clay, egg whites, goat hair, and lime mixed so perfectly it resisted both heat and water. You could pour boiling tea on it and it'd shrug it off like a camel in July. The mud brick absorbed daytime heat slowly, then released it at night when outside temperatures were already cool. And because the Yakshal was often built partially underground, usually 1 to 2 meters below the surface, it borrowed the Earth's natural chill, like tucking your dessert into a sleepy subterranean hug. Here's the quirky detail. Some Yakshals had built-in drainage systems beneath the ice pit, allowing meltwater to slowly seep into the earth or be rerouted for nearby gardens. Yes, Persians even recycled their melted ice, because of course they did. You sit at the bottom edge of the dome, gazing upward. If you squint, it's almost like being inside an upside-down mountain. And you start to realize, this wasn't just architecture, it was temperature choreography. And yet, historians still argue whether the thermal efficiency of Yakshals was purely intuitive or the result of calculated science passed down in trade guilds and masons' scrolls. Some say they stumbled into it. Others claim it was deliberate knowledge shared among engineers who never wrote it down. Oral tradition or lost science? We may never know for sure. But you imagine a builder, calloused hands smoothing the inner walls, checking the angle of sunlight during different months, watching where shadows fall during the solstice. Trial and error, yes, but also intention. Let's pause for a sleepy little joke. Imagine the building crew. Foreman, okay guys, today we're building an ice house. Worker, in the middle of the desert? Yup. Are you feeling okay? You grin, because it is ridiculous. And that's what makes it wonderful. You move to the dome's side and trace the shallow, angled ledges built into the exterior. These weren't ornamental either. They cast shade across parts of the dome during high sun, slowing the transfer of heat. Even the shadows were part of the insulation. And when it rained, which was rare but sacred, these grooves helped redirect water away from the foundation, preserving the dry, cool interior. A self-maintaining building. Passive cooling, natural drainage, solar minimization, evaporative airflow. It's everything your modern green architect dreams of, but done thousands of years ago with no blueprint, no CAD software, and definitely no warranty plan. You imagine crouching in the heart of the dome on a midsummer afternoon, the outside air blistering. But here, stillness. The walls cool to the touch, a faint breeze whispering from a floor vent. And in the center, wrapped in straw or thatched reeds, a treasure. Stacked bricks of crystal clear ice, some wrapped in linen, others bare like ancient diamonds. The dome never brags. It just works. And somehow it becomes part of the community. It's not just a building, it's a rhythm. Ice arrives in winter, is stored by spring, served in summer, and revered in stories passed down like lullabies. You can almost hear them now, grandmothers telling sleepy-eyed children, "Yes, little one, we made winter stay." In that moment, sitting inside a sun-baked miracle that refuses to melt, you feel something shift. This wasn't about luxury. It wasn't even about innovation. It was about control. In a land where heat ruled like a tyrant, the Yakshul was a quiet rebellion. And for a brief, goosebump-raising second, you feel it too. That chill against your wrist, that whisper of cool air that says, "We are not helpless." You lean back, watching light dance across the curved ceiling. The mud is silent. The air doesn't move much. But the cold is still here. Alive. Waiting for the next hand to reach in and pull out a miracle. You leave the Yakul behind for now, not because it's finished showing you its secrets, but because you're ready to see what fed it. After all, keeping ice in the desert isn't just about storage. It's about water. And where there is no river, no lake, and no mercy from the sky, the Persians still found a way. Your sandals crunch over the baked earth as you follow a trail that doesn't look like much a narrow groove, maybe half a meter wide, snaking gently through the dust. But this is a qanat. It might just look like a ditch, but it's one of the most quietly brilliant feats of ancient engineering ever devised. Here's the mainstream historical fact. A qanat is an underground channel used to transport water from a distant aquifer or mountain spring to a settlement, sometimes over dozens of kilometers. The system used gravity alone, no pumps, no pressure, just slope, shadow, and stubbornness. Ancient Persians began building qanats over 2,500 years ago, and some of them are still in use today. You kneel beside the trench, imagining water flowing beneath your fingertips, cool, dark, and hidden. These channels were carved by hand, sometimes as deep as 100 meters below the surface. Vertical shafts spaced every 20 to 30 meters allowed workers to dig and breathe as they tunneled horizontally toward the destination. And guess what? Many yakshals were connected directly to these qanats, not just for water supply, but for cooling. You see, the airflow through the qanat could be channeled into the yakshal via clever tunnel design, delivering both water and a constant draft of cool underground air. The quirky tidbit? Some qanat diggers called mokanis were trained from childhood, almost like desert ninjas. They memorized soil temperatures by touch, could detect underground water with their feet, and were sometimes paid in ice instead of silver. Imagine that working for frozen water in a land where most people had never even seen it. You walk further along the path, and soon the trench disappears underground. Just beyond it, a small stone building sits unassuming, boxy, and squat. This is a mother well, where the water begins its journey. Cold groundwater, protected from the sun, slips into the channel and flows under the desert for kilometers, underground highways of survival. You lean against the side of the structure and stare out across the flat plain. No pipes, no pumps, just patience. Historians still argue whether qanat technology originated solely in Persia or was a combination of earlier Babylonian and Egyptian water practices. Some claim the idea may have even trickled in from northern Africa or the Indus Valley. Others insist it was a homegrown response to uniquely Persian geology. What everyone agrees on is this: it worked spectacularly. You take a moment to imagine the construction. Teams of men, often working blind in the dark, hammering out the tunnel inch by inch. It could take years to complete a single qanat. And yet, it wasn't built for glory. It was built for the future. A sleepy little joke sneaks into your thoughts. Modern plumbing breaks in a week, but ancient qanats are still delivering water thousands of years later. Somewhere, a Persian engineer is slow blinking in smug satisfaction. You crouch over one of the air shafts. It's not much wider than a man's shoulders, ringed with old bricks. You drop a pebble, one Mississippi, then a faint splash. The system still lives. And that's the thing, it's all connected. The ice house, the desert trench, the water flowing unseen beneath your feet. The Persians didn't rely on luck. They choreographed their environment. Here, in this dry cradle of invention, the qanats didn't just serve the elite. They supplied entire communities, gardens, bathhouses, and of course, the sacred yakshals. You picture workers refilling the Yakchal's interior pools using Kanat water at dusk, then leaving the shallow surface to freeze overnight. The beauty of the system wasn't just its function, it was its silence. The Kanats whispered beneath the land, invisible but vital. You'd never know they were there unless you were thirsty. You continue walking along the ancient path, feeling the pull of gravity beneath your feet. Somewhere deep underground, water flows like a soft lullaby. You imagine it winding its way toward a dome of silence, where ice waits in the dark. And with each step, you feel more amazed. No bricks of cold without rivers of patience. No saffron sorbet without miles of mud-dug tunnels. No miracle without the mundane labor of invisible engineers. In a world where most people only noticed water when it was gone, the Persians made sure it never left. You're starting to realize something. Ice wasn't the point. Ice was the result. The point was control, mastery, the ability to make the desert do something it didn't want to do. And nowhere is that quiet defiance more obvious than in the ingredients the Persians used, not in food, but in function. You've already met sarouj, that odd goat hair and egg white mud cocktail. But now let's dig deeper into how the Persians tamed heat itself. The real battle wasn't against fire. It was against difference, against extremes. You crouch beside the base of a yakshal again, this time examining the foundation, and you spot something subtle, grains of salt baked into the seams. Not flavoring function. Salt, as it turns out, wasn't just something to sprinkle on food. It played a quiet role in insulation, waterproofing, and sometimes even in freezing. Some ice pools were salted to lower the water's freezing point, allowing for quicker overnight ice formation when the desert dipped toward freezing. Who knew? The desert made better use of its salt than most modern kitchens. Mainstream historical fact: Persians utilized passive cooling principles long before the term existed. The combination of evaporation, insulation, wind flow, and thermal mass allowed temperatures inside a yakshal to remain just above freezing even when the air outside climbed past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius. The domes were built facing north to minimize direct sunlight and shaded where possible. But that's not all. Quirky detail. Some builders embedded crushed pottery shards or charred sand into the walls to further reduce heat absorption. Not only did it darken the exterior slightly helpful at night, but it absorbed and released heat more slowly. A kind of prehistoric thermal battery. You rub your hand across a smooth patch of wall and imagine the builder who stood here before you, arms dusted with clay, eyes squinting in the heat, muttering calculations in the air. How thick, how wide, how cool, how quiet. And then, of course, there's air. Invisible, but crucial. Above your head, a small shaft in the dome lets warm air rise and escape, drawing in cooler air from the floor vents. It's not mechanical, it's not noisy, but it works. Slowly, efficiently, like a camel that never hurries, but never stops. This is where the badgers, or wind catchers, enter the story. Picture tall, slender towers perched atop buildings like elegant chimneys, but reversed. They weren't for smoke, they were for wind. When wind entered one side of the tower, it was funneled downward into the structure, cooling the interior. Some systems even included channels leading to pools of water at the base, so the air was humidified and chilled before circulating. Natural air conditioning. No cords, no noise, no regrets. And here's where the scholarly debate kicks in. Did the yakshals themselves always include wind catchers? Or were the two technologies separate cousins, not siblings? Some believe they were integrated only in certain regions, while others argue that the airflow principles were built into yakshal geometry itself, no towers required. Either way, the goal was the same: make hot air move like cold air, and do it quietly. You step outside again, eyes adjusting to the bright light. The desert has a way of looking indifferent, but you know better now. You know it can be persuaded. Let's throw in a sleepy joke while we're here. You imagine an ancient Persian engineer pitching the yakshal to his skeptical neighbor. Engineer, it keeps ice cold all year. In the desert? Yes. Next, you'll tell me you made yogurt without a cow. Actually. You chuckle softly, the kind of laugh that doesn't wake anyone but warms the edges of your mouth, because truly this all should be impossible. And yet, here it is. Ice. In the desert. Stored, protected, and served with saffron and rosewater. As you stroll around the dome, you notice a small side chamber carved into the base. It's not for guests, it's for supplies, tools for chipping, spare baskets, and bags of sand. Sand, you ask? Yes. Sand played a starring role too. When layered over stored ice bricks, it added both insulation and weight, reducing melt. It absorbed moisture, prevented frost from forming sticky clumps, and could be sifted and reused season after season. No refrigeration units, no plastic wrap, just humble sand doing its job. You reach down and let a handful sift through your fingers. It's warm now, but in winter, this sand would be nestled against the cold like a guardian, a dusty beige bodyguard against the heat. And it strikes you. Every material used had purpose. Nothing was waste. Even the way buildings breathed, letting warm air out and cool air linger, was intentional, like the entire structure had a pulse, a breath, a mood. Some modern architects now study these ancient systems for answers to today's climate challenges. Passive cooling, zero-emission refrigeration. The yakshal, long ignored, is making a quiet comeback in the green architecture world. They say old wisdom is coming back in style. The Persians just smile and whisper, "We were never out." So now you sit at the edge of the dome again, back where the shade hugs the wall, and you think about everything this structure has done for centuries, with no electricity, no noise, no applause. Just bricks, wind, sand, and time. And at the very center, a single bowl of chilled dessert, sweetened with saffron and resilience. The sun has slipped lower now, casting long amber shadows across the desert floor. You follow one of them, drawn toward a scent on the breeze, something floral, something unexpected. It smells like roses? You round a low stone wall and see it, a shallow clay dish resting on a woven mat, half filled with what looks like snow. Nestled inside it, threads of gold and crimson, a few tiny slivers of what you recognize as pistachio, and a curl of something that might be vermicelli. Welcome to dessert. Not just any dessert falude. Here's the mainstream historical fact. The Persians were among the first civilizations to create chilled desserts using stored ice, long before the concept of refrigeration existed elsewhere. Faluda, a mixture of thin noodles made from rice starch, rosewater, lime juice, and semi-frozen syrup or snow, dates back to at least 500 BCE. It wasn't ice cream in the modern sense. It was more like a fragrant, slushy sorbet with noodles that slid playfully between your teeth. And here's the quirky bit. In some royal households, the presentation of faluda was ceremonial. Ice would be shaved into delicate curls, almost like snowflakes, and shaped into little pyramids before being drizzled with sweetened essence of violet or saffron. One Achaemenid noblewoman allegedly insisted hers be topped with pomegranate seeds arranged in the constellation of Taurus. Whether that's fact or folklore, who's to say, but it sounds just silly enough to be true. You pick up the bowl and let the icy threads of dessert melt slowly on your tongue. It's unreal, cold like river water, fragrant like a summer garden, and just sweet enough to quiet the rest of the world. The noodles are soft, but springy. The rosewater lingers in your nose. And for a moment, you forget you're in the middle of a place that can kill you with heat by lunchtime. Historians still argue about whether falude evolved independently or was influenced by earlier snow-based drinks from Mesopotamia or India. Some say it was a cousin of sharbat, a sweet drink made from sugar and fruit, poured over ice. Others believe it developed alongside the earliest Persian sorbets, eventually giving rise to the Italian sorbetto via Arab traders centuries later. What's not debated? It was a triumph of contrast. Cold in heat, sweet in salt. Soft in harshness. You walk a little further and see a merchant kneeling over a low table. He's crushing saffron in a mortar, adding a splash of rosewater, and then because he's clearly showing off grates, a touch of frozen lime over the top. The smell is divine, bright and soft and ancient. Another bowl appears beside you, this one with crushed almonds, honey syrup, and what might be snow harvested from the mountains, brought here just this morning. Because yes, some Persians were that committed to dessert. They'd send camel caravans up into the Alborz mountains at night to gather clean snow, then race it back down before the sun rose. The snow would be packed tightly into insulated baskets lined with straw and cloth, hauled at night across the desert. If a camel stumbled, that was a disaster. If one sneezed near the snow, legend says you weren't allowed to talk for the rest of the day. A sleepy joke drifts in. You haven't lived until you've tried to keep a straight face while explaining to your boss that the snow went bad because the camel burped. But even in that silliness, you see the truth. These treats weren't frivolous. They were symbols of mastery. Cold desserts were proof that you'd won, not over an enemy, but over the climate. You'd tamed your surroundings. You'd bent the rules of the desert. And everyone, from palace to peasant, wanted to taste that victory. In public markets, commoners might pay a few copper coins for a cup of snow mixed with sour cherry syrup, especially during Nowruz, the Persian New Year, when renewal and contrast were celebrated. Children would chase ice vendors through the square, laughing and begging for a spoonful. Some vendors carved designs into the sides of their carts, lions, stars, sunbursts, each promising a particular flavor. At court, however, dessert was an art, served between poetry readings and chess matches, carried in on silver trays, sometimes eaten with spoons carved from fig wood, other times with fingers perfumed in sandalwood. And always, the guests were made to pause and appreciate what they were eating. Because to eat cold in the desert was to eat privilege. You sit beneath a fig tree now, the bowl empty in your lap, your tongue tingling slightly from the last spoonful of lime. The night has cooled. The dome behind you hums with quiet pride. And for a moment, you wonder, did someone invent Faluda because they craved something sweet or because they needed a reason to build an ice palace in the sand? Maybe it was both. Maybe necessity inspired the engineering and dessert justified the effort. Either way, it worked. And now, thousands of years later, that same chilled joy is slipping down your throat, carrying with it a bit of saffron, a bit of starlight, and a long, quiet whisper from the past. You're reclining now in the cooling shadow of a palace courtyard. Not your palace. Of course, you're just visiting, in the way you sometimes drift into dreams that aren't quite yours but feel strangely familiar. Before you, carved columns rise like frozen ripples of stone. Birds dart between them, and fountains tinkle nearby, not grand ones, but quiet ones. Their trickling sound meant less to impress and more to soothe. You're in the Achaemenid Empire, sometime around 450 BCE, and tonight there's a royal banquet underway. But this isn't just any banquet. It's summer, the kind where you can fry lentils on a roof tile by noon. So, of course, dessert must be cold and exotic, and proof that the empire has not only conquered lands, but temperatures. Mainstream historical fact, Achaemenid kings like Darius and Xerxes weren't just political giants. They were showmen, patrons of elaborate feasts where architecture, poetry, and food blended into performance. Banquets were more than meals. They were declarations of order, wealth, and taste. The inclusion of chilled desserts like falude or fruit-infused snow wasn't just culinary, it was theatrical. Tonight's feast is hosted in Persepolis. You glance around. Tapestries of indigo and gold, platters of roasted meats shimmering with honey glaze, musicians strumming delicate instruments. But in the far corner, beneath a shaded arcade, servants are emerging with shallow silver bowls. They're frosted, literally. Tiny beads of cold glisten on their rims. The dessert inside? Snow from the mountains, sweetened with grape molasses, sprinkled with crushed walnuts, and lightly perfumed with cardamom. You blink. Somehow, despite everything you've seen, this still feels impossible. The snow hasn't melted. The bowls are still cold. The desert, for this moment, is defeated. The quirky bit? One preserved court tale tells of a Persian dignitary from Susa who, upon first tasting a frozen apricot puree, believed it was a kind of alchemy. He reportedly tried to cook it, to see how it was made, and ruined an entire vat. They say he never got invited to the summer banquets again. Your gaze drifts to the guests' nobles lounging on cushions, sipping cold rose sherbet through reeds, their beards and headscarves hiding smiles. But among them is a foreign ambassador, perhaps Greek or Median, whose eyes widen with each bite. This isn't just food to him, it's a threat. A nation that can freeze the desert can probably do anything. And that's the point. Historians still debate whether these royal desserts were consumed widely or reserved for the elite. Some accounts suggest small-scale ice access for wealthier households, while others claim even commoners occasionally received seasonal snow deliveries for festival treats. What's certain is that at court, chilled foods became symbols, trophies of taste, climate control, and imperial cleverness. You sip from your bowl. It's quiet, and for a moment you feel it again, that sense of hush inside the yakshal. The contrast is addictive. Cold dessert, hot courtyard, soft music, hard stone. A sleepy joke wanders into your thoughts. Imagine being the kitchen apprentice whose job was to taste all the desserts before serving. Sorry, my lord, I had to eat your portion to make sure it wasn't too delicious. You stretch your legs beneath the table and hear a whisper behind you, one servant to another, gossiping in low tones. Something about an ice delivery arriving late because a camel took a nap in the shade and refused to move. You smile. Even miracles require naps sometimes. You glance toward the edges of the courtyard, where the real work happens, where servants shift like shadows, where ropes lower fresh snow from insulated cellars, and where herbs are crushed in bowls older than memory. You see a man carefully measuring syrup by scent alone, eyes closed, his hand hovering like a musician over a string. Everything is deliberate, every flavor balanced, every texture planned. In this world, dessert isn't an afterthought, it's a finale. And so, with your spoon tapping softly against the side of the bowl, you recline on the cushion and stare up at the stars, already awake above the columns. A breeze nudges the curtains. Someone refills your bowl, and you think, maybe this is why empires are built. Not for war, not for gold, but for moments like this where impossible things melt slowly on your tongue while the desert watches from outside the wall, unsure whether to be furious or impressed. You're not in the palace anymore. Now you're walking across the open desert under the moonlight. The air has cooled, but only just. You can still feel the baked heat clinging to the ground like a memory. In the distance you hear it, bells, soft and irregular, clinking, plodding, familiar, a caravan. You step aside to let it pass, though in this dreamlike landscape, they don't seem to notice you. Or maybe they do, but they're used to strangers drifting through the desert, silent and wide-eyed. This caravan isn't hauling silk or grain, no incense, no weaponry. This convoy is far more precious, it's carrying ice. Wrapped in straw, buried under layers of linen and salt, hidden in reed baskets tied tightly to the backs of camels. Mainstream historical fact: ice caravans were a very real part of Persian life. When local yakuls were too small or empty, blocks of ice were sometimes transported from higher elevations, especially from the Alborz Mountains in the north of Iran across vast, arid plains. These journeys often took place at night to avoid the sun and required specialized packing techniques to keep the ice intact. You walk beside a camel now, its great feet shushing softly across the sand. The man leading it wears a loose white tunic, his face half wrapped in cloth, more for wind than modesty. He hums, a low, steady sound. You think it might be a working tune, or maybe just a habit born from solitude. Here's the quirky detail. In some regions, these ice-hauling camels were trained to walk more slowly than others. Not for laziness, but because slower movement meant less friction, and less friction meant less internal heat. A hot camel was bad for the load. So, if your camel was naturally energetic, you might have to bribe it with dried figs to stay calm. You peer into one of the baskets. Just a sliver of it is visible through the wrapping. Not snow anymore, ice. Dense, compressed, clearer than you'd expect, as if it remembers the mountain it came from. The caravan leader adjusts the ropes, whispering something to the camel, probably a promise or a warning. It's hard to tell. Then he turns to the younger man beside him. If it melts before we get there, he says, we carry back empty shame. Historians still argue about how common these ice caravans were. Some claim they were routine, especially during royal events. Others suggest they were rare, reserved for elite occasions, or in emergency heat waves. There are even inscriptions hinting at delivery quotas, suggesting a kind of ancient supply chain. One broken tablet reads simply, 2 nights, no delay, ice for the priestess. You continue walking, and the desert stretches endlessly ahead. The camels move like ghosts, the baskets sway. Somewhere in the line, someone sneezes, and 3 heads turn in unison. You smile. Even back then, no one wanted their frozen gold contaminated. A sleepy little joke glides into your mind. Imagine being the first person ever to get yelled at for melting the boss's dessert. You had one job, Arash. One job. But truly, this was delicate work. The packing was everything. Baskets were often lined with straw, then wrapped in lambskin, then covered in linen soaked in brine. Some merchants used beeswax-coated cloth for added insulation. The outermost layers were often marked with colored thread red for royal, blue for market, and green for temple use. And still, no matter how careful you were, you always lost some ice. It was just a matter of how much. You pause beside a resting camel. its eyes half-lidded. It looks as bored as a creature can be. But then again, it's hauling frozen water across a sun-scorched earth. Maybe it understands irony better than you do. One of the younger caravanners crouches down, opens a small chest, and pulls out a ceramic jug. He pours a few drops of rosewater over a tiny shard of ice, barely enough to fill a spoon, and passes it to a friend. They share it like treasure. Not for hydration, not even for flavor, but for the ritual. That's what ice was in the end. A ritual. A reminder that the impossible could be preserved, carried, and shared. You weren't just eating something cold, you were tasting persistence. As the caravan resumes its gentle rhythm, you stay behind, watching them disappear into the horizon. The sound of bells fades, the wind returns, the desert exhales. And now you know, the miracle of Persian ice wasn't just in the yakshals, or the mountains, or the recipes. It was in the carrying. In the willingness to walk slow through heat and moonlight, just to deliver a chill in time for supper. The caravan has vanished now, swallowed up by the landscape, leaving behind only a few soft indentations in the sand and the echo of camel bells in your ear. You turn back toward the edges of a desert village, modest clay homes, shadowed courtyards, and the low murmur of dusk winding down. But your destination isn't a home or a palace. It's a half-buried structure, square and squat, barely distinguishable from the dunes, unless you know exactly what to look for. No dome this time, no grandeur, just a rough entrance leading downward. You descend. The light dims, the air cools, and a familiar hush wraps around your shoulders. Another yakshal, but this one is older, less celebrated. And here's why. It wasn't built for royalty. This one served the people. A small town's frozen heartbeat. And tonight, you're thinking not of kings and court desserts, but of the ones who built all this. The laborers, the planners, the engineers without names. The people who chiseled tunnels with hand tools, carried ice in baskets lined with straw, and mixed the perfect blend of sarouj with sunburned arms and cracked lips. Mainstream historical fact, yakshals and their supporting infrastructure weren't designed solely by noble architects. Much of the work, especially digging qanats, hauling bricks, and laying insulation, was done by enslaved people, indentured laborers, and rural craftsmen. Their contributions were essential and often forgotten. You sit on a stone ledge near the inner chamber and run your fingers across the rough surface. It's uneven, patched in places, clearly maintained by many hands over many years. There's no symmetry here, no polished perfection, just effectiveness. Here's the quirky bit. Oral stories from rural Iran mention certain ice mystics, elder craftsmen, who claimed to feel heat with their bare hands in such a precise way that they could detect flaws in insulation without tools. Some became so respected that people sought them out for other advice: when to plant, when to marry, when to dig. The line between engineer and oracle blurred, and yet, despite their importance, few of their names remain. Most are lost, buried like the ice they protected. Which is why you're here, to remember. You stand again and walk toward the yakchal's rear wall, where faint engravings have been scratched into the mud, just lines, initials, and what might be handprints. Were they marking their work, leaving a trace, or just resting their palms against the wall after a long day in the sun? Historians still argue whether common laborers received recognition or reward for their role in Persia's frozen revolution. Some texts suggest craftsmen could earn status or freedom through exceptional work, while others imply that the system was rigid, exploitative, and indifferent. What's certain is that without these hands, there would have been no chilled dessert for the court. No snow delivered to the square. No faluda. No celebration. You feel it now, the heaviness of forgotten work. Not sad, exactly just weighty. You imagine one of these builders returning home after a long shift, arms covered in dust, the scent of goat hair and lime still lingering on his tunic. He kisses his child's head, washes his hands with cold water from the qanat, and sits down to a bowl of lentils with bread. No dessert, no ceremony, just survival. A sleepy little joke finds its way into the quiet. I built the coolest building in Persia, literally, and all I got was this sunburn. You smile gently because it's true. And not true. They got more than sunburns. They got legacy. Because here you are, thousands of years later, standing in a structure that still does its job, still keeps cool, still whispers its story into the desert air. You look around and imagine the team that built it, some seasoned, some young, one leaning on his shovel like a philosopher, another arguing about which angle gives the best airflow. Maybe they laughed, maybe they sang, maybe they built in silence, but they built. And you realize this is where greatness hides. Not just in what's preserved, but in who preserved it. Not in the golden bowl, but in the hand that shaped it. The air in the chamber begins to feel even cooler now, almost like the past itself is sighing around you, and you lean into it, not as a guest, but as a quiet witness. Because yes, there were kings who ordered ice, there were poets who praised it, but it was the nameless ones who made it possible. And maybe, just maybe, they knew that someday somewhere someone would step inside, feel that impossible cold, and wonder, who built this? The yakhal breathes around you, slow, steady, ancient. You stay for a moment longer, letting your hands rest on the stone ledge. But the story isn't finished yet. Not until we follow a thread that weaves through the deepest part of Persian identity, their beliefs. You climb out of the chamber and step into twilight. The sky is deep indigo now, the stars just starting to blink open. The desert looks softer somehow, quieter. And that's fitting, because tonight we're going to talk about something both cosmic and cold. How the Persians saw ice, not just as utility, but as symbol. You walk toward a fire temple at the edge of a nearby village. It's not burning now, just a circle of ash and stone, but it once held flame that never went out. Because in Zoroastrianism, the dominant belief system of ancient Persia, fire was sacred, eternal, the purest form of energy, tied to truth and righteousness. And that's where things get interesting. Mainstream historical fact. Zoroastrianism revered both fire and water as holy elements, symbols of life, purity, and order. In temples, priests maintained sacred fires that burned continuously, while ceremonial water, called ab-zohar, was kept in vessels and treated with nearly equal reverence. The balance of these elements was considered essential to maintaining cosmic harmony. Now imagine the quiet irony, maybe even genius of the yakshal, a structure that preserves cold using earth, air, and water, while standing silently in a land that worshipped heat. The yakshal didn't just hold ice, it held philosophical contrast. Cold in a world built on flame. Stillness in a theology of motion. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some Zoroastrian texts refer to blessed frost as a divine gift sent during times of imbalance. Not often, not dramatically. Just slipped into the language like a riddle. And in some rural communities, ice harvested and kept in a yakshal was used in rituals during droughts or illness, melted slowly, drop by drop, as a symbolic restoration of purity. You walk past a small clay shrine now, cracked and faded. On one side, an inscription has nearly worn away. But if you look closely, you can make out part of a symbol, a stylized flame. And just beside it, faint but deliberate, a droplet, water and fire. Paired. Historians still debate how closely yakhals were tied to religious practice. Some argue they were purely functional, while others see them as part of a larger sacred landscape, particularly in regions where they were built near temples or sacred springs. The truth likely varies by location, as belief often folds into practice like threads in cloth. But tonight, in this hush between stars, you can't help but feel the poetry of it. A dome built to preserve winter. A society that worshipped flame, and yet both coexisting, not in conflict, but in conversation. You settle beside a dried-up stream bed. The sand here still holds the trace of water, like a faded signature. Somewhere nearby, the wind shifts, and you catch the faint scent of smoke. Not unpleasant, just present. And a sleepy joke floats into your thoughts. When your religion's sacred element is fire, but your favorite dessert is frozen congratulations, you've achieved spiritual balance and gelato. You chuckle, the sound swallowed quickly by the quiet. Because this is the thing. Ancient Persian science wasn't separate from philosophy. It didn't have to choose between logic and belief. A yakshal could be an engineering marvel and a vessel of meaning, a place to store snow and a gesture of defiance against chaos. You think again of the geometry, those perfect angles, that sacred slope. It wasn't just about staying cold. It was about harmony, about living with the elements, not against them, about shaping the world gently, like carving meaning from wind. And maybe that's why these structures lasted. Not because they were perfect, but because they were understood. Because they didn't fight the fire, they spoke to it. Offered the gift of stillness. A dome that mirrored the heavens and cradled the opposite of flame. So now, as you stretch out beneath the stars, your head resting against a cool patch of stone, you imagine someone centuries ago doing the same. A mason or a priest, or maybe just a tired traveler eating the last bite of cold fruit from a clay bowl. And above you both, fire burns in the distance. But here, right here, rice waits in silence. You've drifted far from the actual now, both in time and distance. The stars have shifted, the scent of clay is fading. But something new tingles in the air, tension, whispers, movement not from nature, but from people. Not peaceful, not reverent, strategic. You've stepped into a different Persia, one where cold is no longer a quiet triumph, it's a target. Tonight, we're not harvesting ice, we're protecting it. You walk through a low corridor, stone walls torchlit, and step into a map room. Not a grand hall, but a small space cluttered with scrolls, reed pens, sand trays, and wooden tablets etched with delivery routes. A young man looks up at you, tired, sharp-eyed, suspicious. He gestures toward the parchment nearest you. A trade route, marked not with gold or grain, but ice symbols. X's. Circles. A red line, crossed out. This is not a story about dessert anymore. It's about espionage. Mainstream historical fact. The Persian Empire's infrastructure, its canals, ice houses, and delivery networks, was so advanced, so valuable, that protecting knowledge of it became a political act. Rivals, from Greek states to Central Asian kingdoms, wanted to understand how Persia had achieved such climate defiance. In a desert war, controlling water and temperature wasn't just about survival, it was about power. And the quirky detail? Some texts refer to secret ice scribes, low-ranking officials or guild members whose sole job was to keep track of ice inventory, trade routes, and preservation methods. If caught revealing this knowledge outside the empire, they could be exiled or worse. One Babylonian letter fragment even accuses a Persian official of smuggling cold through shadows. Poetic, and probably accurate. You're now inside a storage chamber where baskets once filled with snow are wrapped, labeled, and sealed. Some are decoys. Others are real. One has been sabotaged, cut from beneath, melted, lost. A man curses in a language you don't recognize. There's talk of spies, not warriors or thieves, but scholars, cooks, and builders sent from rival courts to observe and report. A Greek diplomat once asked to tour a yakshal in Susa, ostensibly to study architecture. Days later, a northern storage pit was raided, and its interior plans were copied in chalk on the side of a merchant's donkey. Historians still debate whether these accounts were exaggerated, embellished court gossip, or real intelligence leaks. But Persia's enemies did eventually adopt similar cooling structures, and whether they figured it out on their own or received a little help, well, that's a story buried in melted snow. You walk past a half-finished yakshal model, carved in miniature, its angles precise. Beside it, a list. Test different reed density. Increase straw padding. Fireproof outer wall. Someone's been thinking not just about keeping cold in, but keeping others out. A sleepy little joke creeps into the shadows. You know your empire's doing well when your top secret weapon is dessert. You chuckle softly, but you also feel the weight. Ice may seem harmless, but in the right hands, it changes the rules. If you can freeze in the desert, what else can you control? If you can store snow, you can store anything. If you can keep meat fresh, move medicine across great distances, feed armies in summer, then you don't just win feasts, you win wars. There are rumors on the parchment-covered walls that a rogue architect once sold ice dome plans to a rival kingdom, that an exiled Persian engineer built a false yakshal in Mesopotamia, one that cracked within a season, that a woman posing as a kitchen servant in Persepolis disappeared one night, along with 3 carved spoons, a reed straw, and an entire roll of snow-preserving linen. Coincidence? No one thinks so. You exit the chamber and step into the night, heart a little heavier. A breeze passes over you, cool, dry, familiar. It could be from the Kanats, or the distant mountains, or a hidden wind catcher in the architecture. Or maybe it's just the desert exhaling again. But now you see it differently. This isn't just a tale of engineering. It's a game of power. One where silence is safety, and melted snow is as revealing as spilled ink. And so you walk quietly, your footsteps soft, as if not to alert the past to your presence. You think of all the lives that moved behind the scenes. Builders who memorized dimensions, porters who knew which camel carried what, guards who watched ice as if it were gold. Because in some ways, it was. And as the stars overhead pulse with that ancient rhythm only the desert knows, you realize something. The cold wasn't just preserved in ice houses. The air is cooler now, noticeably so. The kind of cool that isn't just a gift from the breeze, but earned, built, shaped, invited in. You wrap your arms around yourself, not from chill, but from recognition. The story is winding towards something. It feels like resolution, but not quite closure. You find yourself back at the edge of a village, where a group of elders sits beneath a low fig tree. They're not talking loudly. In fact, they're barely talking at all, just murmuring, sipping from small ceramic cups, breaking dates with their thumbs. Their feet are dusty, their eyes are slow, but one of them points to something beyond the date palms, just past the last house. You follow the gesture and see it. A squat dome half sunk into the ground. Not ancient, but not modern either. Weathered, quiet, real. Because yes, even today, in rural parts of Iran, a few yakshuls still stand. Mainstream historical fact, while most ancient yakuls fell into disuse with the arrival of electric refrigeration, some were maintained well into the 20th century, and a handful are still honored or preserved today. Sometimes for storage, sometimes as architectural heritage, and sometimes just because no one ever tore them down. In Yazd, Kerman, and other desert towns, the memory of frozen water still whispers through these conical ghosts. You approach the dome slowly. There's no ceremonial entrance, just a sloped stair partially covered in windblown sand. You take it, down, step by step. The air shifts again, cooler, earthier, familiar. Inside, it's empty, but not forgotten. You see traces of activity, a chipped ladle, an old reed basket half split with age, a pair of sandals someone left behind decades ago and never reclaimed. The walls bear graffiti, not modern spray paint, but scratched in prayers, names, dates. 1372. Ali was here. Snow fell once in June. You smile. Here's the quirky bit. In some villages, the last surviving yakshal became not just a freezer, but a story house. Children would sneak inside during hot afternoons, lie on the cool floor, and listen as grandparents told tales about kings and camels, about saffron ice, about the time someone tried to smuggle a peach cobbler past the palace gate in a basket of snow. You walk slowly along the wall. Someone has painted a moon near the top, crude, faded, but unmistakably silver. Beneath it, a spoon. And you wonder, who drew it? A child? A bored builder? A tired porter waiting for the next shipment? It doesn't matter. It's here now, smiling at you from across the years. Historians still debate how these last yakshals should be categorized. Are they monuments? Machines? Memories? There's even academic disagreement about what to do with them. Restore them? Leave them alone? Modernize them into museums? But here, standing in this dome with nothing but your breath and a bit of dust, you know the answer is simpler. Remember them. A sleepy little joke comes to mind. Imagine trying to explain a 2,500-year-old mud fridge to your landlord. No outlets, but the ice cream won't melt. You laugh, softly, because it would work. Still. And now your mind drifts to those who don't remember. Children born in cities, teenagers who've never tasted faluda from a clay bowl, who think refrigeration started with glass doors and humming appliances. They don't know about goat hair insulation. They've never stood beneath a dome that exhaled coolness. But someone, maybe a quiet elder with cracked hands and endless patience, will tell them. Will lead them down the steps. Will point to the floor and say, "Here the snow slept, for months, even in August." You reach up and touch the dome's curve one more time. It feels warm now because the sun has risen outside, but it remembers the cold. The way a pillow remembers your shape after a long nap, and so do you. Because this whole journey hasn't just been about engineering or empire. It's been about resistance. The slow, stubborn belief that nature doesn't always get the final say. That with the right materials and the right math, and enough people willing to carry snow through the night, you can eat sorbet in a sandstorm. And not just once. Again, and again, and again. Until even the sun gives up and says, "Fine, you win this round." You're walking again, though you're not sure how long it's been. The desert changes slowly, like a dream where the colors shift only when you're not looking. You pass another old yak hall, this one crumbling, half swallowed by sand, its dome cracked like an eggshell. A small bush grows out of one side, and still it stands. But now your thoughts drift outward, beyond Persia, beyond the domes. Because here's the truth. Ideas this good never stay in one place forever. Mainstream historical fact. Persia's mastery of desert cooling didn't go unnoticed. As traders, travelers, and conquerors moved through the region, elements of the yakshal's design, passive cooling, thick insulation, airflow regulation, spread to other cultures. In parts of North Africa, you'll find domed ice houses with eerie similarities. In India, Mughal emperors built snow pits lined with straw to keep sherbet chilled. And in Europe, centuries later, ice houses appeared in noble estates, stone chambers dug into the ground, where winter ice was stored for summer desserts. You sit down on a low rock, the sand warm beneath you. You're thinking about how knowledge travels, not just across miles, but through people. Caravans, stories, mistakes. A Greek merchant sees a conical dome and tries to sketch it from memory. A traveler from Central Asia notices the cool air in a Persian bathhouse and wonders how the walls breathe. A soldier deserts the army and takes with him a secret: how to keep snow from melting until it's needed. Here's the quirky detail. In 17th century England, aristocrats began experimenting with snow pits of their own. One nobleman in Gloucestershire, convinced he'd reinvented the concept, proudly built a conical structure he called the Ice Mound. He never realized he was unknowingly copying an empire from 2 millennia earlier. His wife allegedly called it the mud teacup. It cracked within a season. And yet, the pattern holds. Good ideas, quiet ones, the kind without armies, survive. They ripple. They find new hands. Historians still argue over how much Persian knowledge directly influenced later refrigeration technologies. Was it a continuous line, or a series of forgotten rediscoveries? Was the architecture passed along intentionally, or did it seep into the cultural groundwater, absorbed by the roots of other civilizations? No one can say for sure. But here's what you know as you sit beneath the widening night sky. Even if the blueprints were lost, the feeling remained. The ache of the heat, the joy of a cold drink, the reverence for balance. That's all it takes sometimes. One child in one village tastes ice on their tongue and wonders, how did this happen? Then they grow up and build something. A sleepy joke drifts into your mind. Humans invented poetry, astronomy, and agriculture. But really, it was the first person to bring ice to a picnic who became the true legend. You let the thought warm you, even as the wind begins to pick up. A breeze now, stronger than before. It carries the scent of dust and something floral. Somewhere nearby, someone's burning dried herbs for sleep. The smoke curls like a memory. And suddenly, you realize you're not alone. There are others here, travelers like you, sitting on rocks, reclining in the shade of invisible domes. Some are from 1,000 years ago. Some might be from next week. But they're all here for the same reason: to learn how something impossible became normal, how snow danced in a desert, how physics bent to patience. And so you close your eyes for a moment, letting your breath slow. You think about all the places this idea traveled: on the back of camels, in the mind of a mason, scribbled on the back of a shipping list, whispered in a poem, from mountaintop to palace table, from yakshal to you. And the whisper you hear now, in the hush between wind gusts, is this: cool isn't just a temperature, it's a triumph. You rise slowly, not because you're tired, but because something about this moment asks for stillness, the kind you feel just before closing a book or just before the last bite of something sweet melts on your tongue. There's one more thing to see. You walk toward the edge of a small village, not ancient, not modern, but somewhere in between. Children play near a faded water trough, a few elders tend to fig trees, and beyond them, it waits. The last yakshal. Not metaphorically, literally. This one isn't hidden or ruined or ceremonial, it's just there, still used. Quietly, no admission fee, no plaque, no spotlight, just a part of life. Mainstream historical fact: even into the 21st century, a few yakshals are still in seasonal use in parts of Iran, particularly in smaller desert towns where tradition meets necessity. These communities, often overlooked by progress, have kept the old ways not out of nostalgia, but practicality. The structure works, so they use it. You step inside. There's no grand entrance, just a doorway framed by bricks smoothed by generations of palms. Inside, a familiar hush greets you. That same soft cold you first felt what seems like years ago. Only now, you know it better. There's straw on the floor, a few baskets, an old metal scoop, bent but functional. And in the center, a single block of ice, not for display, for use. Someone nearby is preparing to slice it. You watch as they chip it with short though careful strikes, not hurried, Not reverent, just precise. The way you do something when it's both ordinary and sacred. The quirky detail? The local children have started calling the yakhal grandpa fridge, not because it's old, though it is, but because it holds snacks, gives you chills, and smells faintly of dust and stories. One little boy claims the ice inside makes his dreams cooler. No one corrects him. You crouch near the wall, fingers grazing the floor. It's colder here. A shadow moves past the doorway. A woman bringing in herbs to store. Mint, basil. Maybe she'll freeze them. Maybe she just likes how they smell in cool air. Historians still argue how long these structures can last. With climate change, shifting water tables, and modern development, some say their time is finally over. Others believe that in an era of energy crises and environmental strain, the world may turn back to passive cooling once again. The irony is thick. The future, perhaps, shaped by the past. But tonight, you're not thinking about the future. You're thinking about the quiet victory of a dome, not just against heat, but against forgetting. You imagine again the very first builder, kneeling in the dust, drawing a circle with a stick. He didn't know he was making history. He just wanted to keep the fruit fresh. And now, you're here, a quiet guest in the last chill before sleep. A sleepy little joke flickers in your brain. Modern fridges hum and blink. But this one, it just waits. You lean back, listening. The silence doesn't feel empty. It feels earned. So you close your eyes, just for a moment. You think of saffron melting on your tongue, of water moving beneath the sand, of wind swirling inside a dome, of fire and ice and everything in between. And you feel it, not cold, but calm. Now, as the stars settle fully above the Persian desert and the winds soften like exhaled lullabies, you ease into the memory of everything we've seen. You've touched walls that outlasted empires, felt air cooled by geometry, tasted desserts kissed by snow in a land without mercy. And somehow, it all made sense. Because it wasn't just about the ice. It was about what it meant to stop the sun with mud and math, to pause the seasons, to carry something fragile through heat and time and loss and still say, here, it's cold, it's sweet, try it. So breathe in slowly. Let that ancient coolness settle on your skin. Maybe the yakshal is gone, or maybe it's still there, quietly defying the odds. Either way, you've carried it with you now. And it will wait, like it always has, for the next person who needs a little stillness, a little silence, a little snow. So pull the blanket up, let your body soften, and drift, gently, slowly, into that dome of dreams where nothing melts too fast.